And now, the DPP Rally Talk Show with Claudia on the Call 360 Network. And here's your host, Claudia Morandi.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's show. I'm Claudia Morandi. I'll be your guest tonight. As a reminder, we protest again October 16. Check out the website don'tpunishpainrally.com to find a venue near you. We have 46 protests planned across the country. It's never too late to organize a protest. Tonight's guest, huge honor. I have a comfort zone. Dr. Dan Laird is with us. Dan is he's a doctor, he's a lawyer, and last night I had the pleasure of speaking with him. Hi, Dan. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Claudia. Thanks so much.
We had a laugh last night because at dinner when I told my mom about you, I said, Mom, you know, he's a doctor and a lawyer, and she said, oh, my God, his mother must be so proud. She's like, how does anybody accomplish all of that? I said, we're going to find out tonight. So, Dan, you're a hero in the community. I met you on Twitter. But you know what struck me about you is your compassion, your empathy, which is, it's hard to find these days. But, you know, you have a practice in Vegas, correct? You've got two practices.
Right. Yes, I have a legal practice and a medical practice.
And we have a whole list of questions for you from people. People want to know, do you still treat patients?
I do, Claudia. I have a pain clinic that I run about 4 days a week, and then I have my law practice. I recently combined them into the same building so that it increases my efficiency, so I can kind of do both at one time. Previously, I had them in two different locations, and it was really hectic, but this has helped a lot combining. And I've tried to do either one alone, but I really do, when I'm just doing law, I really miss the pain patients, and vice versa. When I'm doing the pain, I want to do some legal stuff. So for better or worse, I keep doing both, and each one helps the other one. I think what you said about compassion is really important. It's shocking to me how the attitude of some of the people in organized medicine has gone really negative toward chronic pain patients. This is the most, I think, difficult time it's ever been to be a chronic pain patient. There's an attitude of scorn, of discrimination against chronic pain patients it's really become intolerable.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. You know, just, you know, as an advocate, the stories, when I hear one story, I'll say to myself, oh, it couldn't possibly get worse. And then another one comes rolling in. And you wonder, where has the compassion gone? So, Dan, you're an anesthesiologist, correct?
I was trained as an anesthesiologist, and I did some training in primary care. I did do pain management after that, and I don't do any operating room anesthesiology anymore, but I do the pain management and some primary care, yeah.
And were you a doctor before you were a lawyer, or did you start them both at the same time?
Well, you know, it's funny. I wanted to be a lawyer from the get-go, and then I came from a family that had some physicians in it, and was encouraged in that direction. And then I think, like a lot of people do, when I turned 40, I had kind of a midlife crisis and thought, wow, if I'm going to be a lawyer, I better get the show on the road. And that's when I went back to law school.
Well, I know your patients and your clients, I'm sure, are so thankful to have you in Vegas. And I see people asking questions, is he still taking patients? But you and I spoke briefly, and I don't, for people in Las Vegas who may need a pain management doctor, are you accepting new patients, or what's going on with that?
Unfortunately, I'm not accepting new patients now. I will accept one if I have someone who leaves town or something or moves away, and I just had a couple leave and move to Utah actually, and I did accept a couple more, but it's really tragic what's happened in the sense that when Nevada passed, like so many of the other states, passed an anti-opioid law, it meant that a lot of primary care physicians stopped prescribing opioids and stopped doing comprehensive pain management, and so there were thousands of patients left without a physician. And so it's, I commented to my office manager the other day we could open 5 more pain clinics and it still wouldn't be enough. It's so tragic what's been done to the chronic pain community. It's really something of horrific proportions, and it needs to stop.
Well, hopefully, maybe we only have another 12 months of hell for people with pain. We're starting to see, do you think we've put a dent in the crisis, Dan? We discussed this, 3 years ago or 2 years ago when I came into the picture. Things were dire. And that's why I created a rally organization, because I thought without media, how else could we bring the plight of the pain patient to, you need the media. Do you think things are going to get better, or have you seen some improvement?
Absolutely. Claudia, and I think that almost all of the improvement has been due to chronic pain patients standing up for themselves. It's really a lot to ask for desperately ill people to become activists, but that's what's happened. I remember 2 years ago when it was considered politically incorrect to even suggest that maybe there were some patients where opioids were indicated for the long term. And I remember how frightened I felt myself when I finally had just had enough and spoke out about it. And I felt like I was saying the earth was flat or something. It was just so crazy that it had become so unacceptable to speak the truth. And the truth is that, sure, opioids are dangerous. Everybody's known that. I think the patients know that. I think every physician understands that opioids are potentially addictive and they're potentially dangerous medications. But for some people, responsibly and safely prescribed opioids are the only choice they have. It's the only hope they have for a halfway normal life. And this whole anti-opioid zealotry and just the animus and the scorn toward pain patients has just been really surprising. But as you pointed out, the good news is that it's changing. I mean, in the last couple of years, thanks to people like you, thanks to the advocates on Twitter, thanks to everyone who is not feeling good, they're in pain, but they've nonetheless spoken up, things are changing. And I think how far we take this is up to us, because what we do have that hardly any other activist or political group has is that we have numbers that are off the scale, right? We have pain patients in the millions, and if we could just get mobilized, and you're doing that, and I'm so appreciative of it, and there's so much good that you've done, but I think that we can get back to where we were. Sure, there's always been bad doctors, and there's always going to be bad doctors, but there's legal remedies available for bad doctors, but we need to get back to where we have a patient-centered focus of pain management and of medical care, because the patients are the entire point of the profession. So that's where our focus should be.
Today, another article, Dr. Smithers is all over the news today. Joel Smithers is a doctor from Virginia, and I spoke with his wife earlier, and Dr. Smithers, it's not looking good for him. In the media, you just don't know what to believe when you read a story about a doctor, because, as an American, I want to believe what my country puts out, but we know this all started with the CDC, and then it trickled into doctors' offices, and the anti-opioid zealots have made it unbearable for doctors to practice, just unbearable. Doctors even prescribing now, you walk around with a target on your back, and I think it stems from the medical board terror, the DEA terror. Do you feel as though, when you prescribe, are you hesitant? Is it in the back of your mind? Oh no, I'm in Vegas, what can happen to me?
In my own particular case, my attitude toward opioids has not changed in almost 30 years. I've never been one I had a pharmacology professor in medical school tell me, never be the first doctor or the last doctor to try a new drug or to prescribe a new drug. And his point was that you don't want, just kind of hang back and wait and see what's safe, see what's unsafe, and always do what's in the best interest of the patient. That's how you stay out of trouble as a doctor, is you always put the patient's well-being ahead of your own. And if you do that, bad things generally don't happen. I do take a lot of precautions with regard to prescribing opioids. I mean, I know my patients get so sick of it, but they understand, and I tell them what's going on. I mean, we generate 50 pages of paper every single visit because we're just documenting everything frontwards, backwards, up and down, so that if there ever is a problem that we can defend ourselves. We've never had a problem at our clinics, but I know that a lot of doctors have. And part of the problem is, it's a multifaceted problem, and you're addressing one part of it, which is just, pushback for the DEA, against the DEA and other government regulators. But another part of it is doctors need to be educated about their own legal rights, because when the DEA comes busting down your front door and they say something to you like, it'll be much better for you if you give up your license now, the first thing the doctor needs to do is call his lawyer. Say nothing. Don't let them have anything if they have no warrant, and call your lawyer and don't say a word. A lot of times doctors don't understand their own civil rights or legal rights, and they're so intimidated and frightened by this law enforcement intrusion that they make silly mistakes. And I've been involved in several of these cases where the doctor kind of panicked and made his legal situation much, much worse than it needed to be. So I think every doctor prescribing opioids needs to get a lawyer on retainer, and just have a plan in case something like that happens.
And, when you're a doctor, you carry your medical malpractice insurance, but that medical malpractice insurance means nothing for a suit of this type.
Oh, exactly right, because medical malpractice insurance just covers you in the event that there's a civil lawsuit. In other words, a patient has a poor outcome and believes that it's due to negligence, and the patient sues the doctor. But this is criminal, where it's actually the state or the government coming after you, and there's no insurance for that. You have to pay out of pocket for those legal fees, and that's part of the game. Is they'll hound the doctor and run up his legal fees into the several hundred thousands of dollars, so that he's basically bankrupt and can no longer fight, and then takes a plea deal and gives up his license and moves on. I mean, don't get me wrong, and I know, Claudia, you know as well as I do that there are some bad doctors. There are some doctors who were prescribing opiates for money, and they didn't care what the consequences were to the patients. And those doctors, we don't want practicing. But I certainly understand and see what you're seeing, which is that a lot of good doctors who are being responsible and taking care of patients in an appropriate manner are being hassled by the government. There's no doubt about that.
Okay. So, Dr. Laird, do you think the medical boards are fueling the anti-opioid movement?
Well, maybe to some degree. I think it's going to be really dependent on the specific state. I've been surprised that a lot of what's been going on has been more related to boards of pharmacy. And the pharmacists are as scared as the doctors are. And unfortunately, a lot of times there seems to be some, clash between doctors and pharmacists over these pain meds. But I think ultimately they're on the same side of the issue. And basically it's that neither one wants to get in any kind of trouble, and both want to do what's right for the patient. But sometimes the pharmacists are unreasonable toward the patients, I believe.
I get called in a lot to advocate for people. They call me from the pharmacy. They're like, the pharmacist won't fill the script. And, we really have to go on a social media war, a Twitter war. That's like instant gratification. So for people listening, all I do as an advocate is I start with Twitter, and I usually get a response in about 10 minutes, and then I work my way up to a district manager, the regional manager, and I go all the way to the top. And that's, the pharmacist will always fill it because, when you get into top brass of management at the pharmacy, they're like, just fill the script. But pharmacists, they're terrorized. The DEA storms in the stores, especially in the southern states. They lock the store and they do an audit. And these are young pharmacists. So, we can appreciate what the pharmacists are going through, but then you just get some pharmacists that shouldn't be practicing medicine because they're not doctors. But not only has the pendulum swung, but when it swung, it knocked a few people's common sense out. And it's just it's unbelievable, and these poor people, if they're fortunate enough to have a doctor like yourself to prescribe and follow protocol, but then when they get to the pharmacist, let's say your pharmacy fills it, well, now you're going to run into a problem if you're on Medicaid. Now you can't get your, now the insurance companies have gotten involved. Dan, do you think this was a well thought out plan by the anti-opioid zealots? Hate to drop the name PROP, but it seems like they didn't miss a beat. It seems like they were really successful in following through with an anti-opioid-free country. What are your thoughts about people like PROP and these doctors?
Well, I think ultimately a lot of them are well-meaning. A lot of them also have, I think, a personal agenda. I know of some PROP board members who have personal stories about family members who died of addiction or of an opioid overdose. And so they have, I'm not sure that some of them approach it in a totally objective way. But I think one thing that happened to rank and file doctors and just regular patients is that they've been working on this for years. And a lot of it was done in a not very public way. And I think that some of the people who have very strong anti-opioid views had inroads into the CDC or the government or had connections with people of influence. And so they were working on this for quite some time before we even all woke up and realized what was going on. And it was really when the 2016 guidelines came out that everybody was like, oh my goodness, what's happened?
That's right.
And but what amazes me is how far we've come so fast, because the pain move, I don't know what to call it. Don't punish pain. Let's call it that. Don't punish pain has really taken off, and it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And if the statistics are right, that we're dealing with tens of millions of patients who have who have been ignored. Basically, their needs have been ignored. Their input, their perspective has been disregarded by the powers that be. One of the things about politicians that amazes me, and I learned this years ago working in the trenches in medical politics, is that sure, there's some good politicians who really want to do the right thing, but I think a lot of politics attracts people who are in it for the wrong reasons, and they'll just take the politically easy road, the popular road. And so we really have an advantage there, because I'm sure you're aware of these politicians who have sort of jumped on this anti-opioid bandwagon, and then they realize pretty quickly that the vast majority of their constituents actually, who care about the issue, actually feel the exact opposite, that like you said, Claudia, the pendulum has swung too far and apparently struck a couple people in the head and they lost their common sense. I like the way you put that, because that's what's happened. And now we're starting, thanks to pain patient activists, we're starting to see some of the politicians kind of waking up and saying, wait a minute, maybe this issue is more complex than I thought it was. And maybe the whole simplistic false narrative that doctors are overprescribing and got everybody addicted and then they became fentanyl addicts and they're dying, maybe that's not quite what happened. Maybe it's more complicated than that.
Well, and I think the lion's share of people with any sort of common sense knows that's not the case. You know, in Rhode Island, I tell people, you know, share your knowledge as an advocate, because that's how we grow, and that's how we help one another. And I think that's what's given so many people, especially on social media, faith to keep fighting. And when you share your knowledge, you know, I'm in a state of 1 million people, and all of the overdoses in Rhode Island had one thing in common: illicit fentanyl. And you know, we created the billboard, the "You've Been Duped" billboard, because you need some controversy, because these poor people, you know, I refer to the community as people with pain. They've been just deleted from the country and ostracized. And you've got veterans that have fought for our country, and now they have to pick their benzodiazepine or their pain medication. And it's just, they were attacked from every angle. Insurance company, doctors, DEA. So I definitely see an improvement. I know in Rhode Island especially, you know, when I walk into the State House and my Department of Health sees me, they're like, oh, God, not again, you know, turn the other way. But that's the way I like it. And what my state has done, and they've been cooperative. You know, I'm not fans, but they've worked with me. What the Rhode Island Department of Health has done, they sent out a letter to every primary care physician basically saying, please keep in mind, these are guidelines. They refer to them as regulations. These are suggestions. This is not law. Please, we encourage you to treat your pain. And in my state, it had to start off with some shitty compassion. You know, I called it the emergency room compassion regulation. And it was for doctors to be mindful of the word compassion, because it's free. Compassion is free. And, you know, I had to start, and I tell for the listeners, you know your state, protect your state. And it may start with, you may not get a bill right away. It took me a few years to get legislation. It started with the emergency room compassion. I can't think of the term. It just starts off with something right underneath legislation, and then you work your way up to regulations and legislation, and you get to know your doctors. And I'm fortunate I can do that in my state, but my doctors all say the same thing. They're like, oh my God, this is insane. And I ask doctors, well, what are you doing about it? Like, why don't you fight? Why do you think doctors are hesitant to fight besides being overworked and tired? Why don't pain management doctors especially step up to the plate and say, look, enough. These are my patients. I took an oath. I want to take care of my people. But there's always the but. What is the but?
You know, honestly, Claudia, I think what it is fear. And you see, and sort of this fear is sort of trained in you as you train in the American medical system, where what you have to do to succeed in medicine is you basically keep your head down and work your tail off, and don't make any waves, and don't question authority, and you'll be rewarded if you just get on the treadmill and stay there. And then when you're done, a lot of these doctors have huge amounts of debt, and they see their situation that if I don't have a successful practice for the next 20 years, I'm not going to be able to get out of debt. And I have nothing else. I've spent, all of my 20s and into my 30s training. And so if I were to lose that, if I lost my medical license, I have nothing.
Yeah.
I have nothing I can do. And so, and I think honestly that was one of the reasons that I felt a little bit more free to speak up, because I felt like, well, worst case scenario, if something happened and I lost my medical license, which God forbid, I hope it doesn't ever happen, but if it did, I'd just practice law. Yeah. I know that's a kind of a cynical way to look at it, but I honestly think that a lot of these doctors are afraid of getting in the crosshairs of some governmental agency, or getting in the crosshairs of the medical board or the pharmacy board. Yeah. And I think each doctor goes through that, because if you're a doctor who speaks up for pain patients, and the pain patients know this as well, you're going to be subjected to a series of personal attacks. And the first one that comes out of their mouth is that you're some kind of an addict if you're the patient, and if you're the doctor, then you're the candy man. You're an irresponsible, antisocial doctor who doesn't care about patients, and you're just giving out opioids left and right, and how hateful and irresponsible of you to do that. And then the next thing that comes out from some of these prop members, board members and others is, oh, you must be getting some kind of a kickback from Big Pharma. And It just goes on and on and on. So you've got to have a pretty thick skin to be a pain doctor who's willing to speak up, and you've got to be have a pretty thick skin to be a pain patient who speaks up, because and we need to educate our people. We need to let people know, because these things, if you don't know they're coming, they're pretty devastating. It's pretty hurtful for someone to start calling you a pillhead if you dare to speak up for your own legal rights and your own civil liberties.
Yeah, what a shame. When your medical board, I call it medical board terror, DEA terror, when they're done with you, you've put in 12 years of your life has gone into education, thousands and thousands of hours has gone into training, and you're exhausted, and maybe you're married with children, and you have, like you said, the debt. And I can understand why a doctor would be fearful to prescribe. I can understand why doctors would have fear, period. When I talk with doctors, I was like, well, that's where I come into the picture, because I don't have a medical license to lose. I don't care. Because, I see how much money Prop has benefited off of, the backs of pain patients. And they've used opioid hysteria to their advantage. And it's a shame, but I tell everybody that I meet, we will prevail. And if I didn't think something gross and sad and inhumane was happening to people with pain, I would never have put my face on this cause. If you would be so kind, we're going to take in Dr. Feldman. He's here with us. Hi, Dr. Feldman.
Hi, Claudia, Dr. Laird. How are you?
Good, thank you. Yes.
Well, listen, for the first time in a long time, I have some good news for everyone. So today, and this won't be docketed probably till tomorrow, to the next day, a suit has been filed. This is Feldman and Call versus Federation of State Medical Boards, and this Medical Board of Louisiana, Mississippi, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and California for a constellation of transgressions, including racketeering, 1983 violations, Eighth Amendment violations, and this is going to be a comprehensive suit, which is hopefully going to blow the lid off of this. And everything that you just said will be made public, and the tens of millions of people that you mentioned a few minutes ago will be aware that this is going on, and hopefully the light will be shed on this, and something will be done about it. So that's been in the works. I've been working on this for 5 years, and let's put it this way: Kimberly Kirchmeier, the former cosmetician or esthetician, now director of the California Medical Board, who is running a reign of terror in California. She is now a named defendant. So that's good news for everyone.
Dr. Feldman, Dr. Laird, I don't think Dan is familiar with you. Briefly, Dr. Feldman, who are you? Where do you practice?
Well, I'm just some dumb old doctor that trained at Harvard, that pioneered a lot in pain medicine and minimally invasive spine surgery, and the Louisiana Medical Board suspended my license wrongfully a number of years ago because my market competitor, through political contributions, became the president of the medical board. And that suspension destroyed my practice that I built over almost 30 years. But that suspension was over almost a year ago, and then they decided that I need to pay them $500,000. So what I'm telling people is that, yes, the DEA is responsible for much of what's going on, but the DEA has a partner in crime, and that is the medical board. And at this point, it's hard to tell who is the perpetrator, because I think they're in it together. Without the medical board, the DEA would not have doctors to go after. They work together. They make cross referrals. If they can't get them on one end, they get them on the other end, and I believe that they split assets. That is not unheard of, that federal and state agencies now split assets seized in civil forfeitures. And this is so incredibly deep. It goes way beyond your philosophy of whether opiates are good or bad. It is now an attack on an entire group of 30 or 40 or million people who have become collateral damage in a power struggle, in a struggle for money, in a racketeering organization. And most of it is perpetrated by the medical boards, who have, up until now, have been able to essentially stay silent. But I hope that will not be the case after tomorrow.
So, Dan, do you think a lawsuit of this magnitude, it seems like judges are making examples of doctors. Do you think maybe we could make examples out of, the DEA, and hopefully with a lawsuit we can send a message enough? I hate to use the term, no pun intended, fed up, because that's prop spoken, but do you think doctors and pain patients can make an example through a lawsuit that says back off?
Absolutely, Claudia, and I'm so glad to hear that Dr. Feldman and his allies have filed a lawsuit or about to file a lawsuit. I think that, I'm biased because I'm a lawyer, but I honestly believe that the law, where there's a wrong, there's usually a remedy. Sometimes it takes a while, and sometimes it takes years of litigation, but that's how we resolve conflict in a civilized society. And, you don't sue people lightly. Most people don't like to get involved in litigation, but sometimes there's no other choice. Mm-hmm. And the litigation separates the serious people from the not serious people. And a lot of these people who are willing to attack chronic pain patients and just say nonsensical, off-the-cuff, flippant comments that are usually derogatory and feed into stereotypes, some of those people, I think that if they were faced with litigation, they would probably just stop, because sure. This is, one patient told me, this is our lives. This is, we don't have anything else. This is what makes or breaks our life. So, yeah, we take this very seriously, and I do believe that litigation can really address some of these issues.
Yeah. I think once, the anti-opioid zealots, once they get served with papers, and also medical boards, because I just think medical boards are running rogue. You're raised to believe that the government is honest and doctors are held in such an esteem. And I go up against psychiatrists a lot. And before I felt like I would have to defend people with pain. And now I'm like, nah, cut the shit. Look, the jig is up. the people are so, especially the psychiatrists and opioids and people with pain. I mean, these poor people, they've just been slaughtered by the zealots. But, I think this is good news, what Dr. Feldman brought to us. Dan, let me ask you about veterans. I get so many phone calls to advocate for veterans. Do you represent veterans only in Vegas, or can you represent them throughout the country should they have a claim that, you could take them on as, a client?
We do represent veterans. They have to be, the VA, when you sue the VA, you are suing the federal government, so you have to go through a special federal statute, which is kind of my specialty area in the law. So we do take medical malpractice cases against the VA and also military hospitals nationwide. But what the VA has done to pain patients is just it's really reprehensible, and we're starting to see some of the rotten fruit of their policy coming to light. We have a case we're about to file against the Las Vegas VA where a patient just received absolutely horrific care. When you mentioned earlier about just when you think it can't get any worse, here comes another case that is more horrifying than anything you've ever seen. And that's just happened here, where a veteran with metastatic cancer was basically tapered off his pain medication because his pain, quote, wasn't real. And he had metastatic cancer to every organ in his body and his bones. And there's nothing more painful than bony metastasis of cancer. And we've just reached a point where this has gotten so out of control that, back before pain became a priority in medicine, there were a few lawsuits over inadequate pain control where a patient just was denied adequate pain control. And then those suits kind of went away as there was an emphasis on pain management, and the importance of treating pain effectively came to the forefront of medicine. But now we're going back the other way now. We're going back to a point where patients with metastatic cancer die in horrific agony because of these people who don't understand addiction, don't understand pain management, and are just basically forcing their own moralist views about opiates down everybody's throat. And so I think it's time, I agree with Dr. Feldman, it's time to bring back the litigation.
Absolutely. I mean, nothing says I'm here more than litigation, in my opinion. We have Dr. Ibsen on the phone. Hi, Mark.
Hello.
Hi, Mark. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Claudia. Thank you, Dr. Laird, for serving on our show. It's wonderful.
Oh, you bet.
My question was answered just now about whether or not you do any out-of-state work. My question now is a new one based on media stuff today. The story about Dr. Smithers is now national through the AP, and it appeared in my local paper today. This story about the sad situation with Dr. Smithers and thousands of milligrams of medications prescribed and 800 charges, and it just sounds just so awful. I'm wondering, is there a way to get your hands on the charging documents and search warrants and stuff like that happen in a case like this? Because every case I've actually found out the details on, the lies in the media have been egregious. Have you been seeing something similar to that?
Absolutely, and I've consulted on a few cases where the doctors are being charged by the federal government, and you're absolutely correct that they will, and some of the anti-opioid organizations like PROP will do the same thing. They'll come up with a way to make the amount of opioid that was prescribed ridiculously large. Like they'll either use number of pills prescribed without any reference to what the strength of the medication was, or and they do this in lawsuits too, in civil litigation, where lawyers will do the same thing to try to make things sound as horrific as possible. And as you know, those aren't valid ways of measuring the prescription of opioids, because you need to know about the patient's medical history. A lot of times these DEA agents will just charge in and they'll find some quote unquote pain expert who will look at nothing more than the PDMP aware, the state database, and not even have the patient charts, and then offer an opinion that there was too much opioid prescribed when they don't even know what the patient had. They don't know whether the patient had an earache or metastatic prostate cancer, and I guess it doesn't matter to them. It's just they're going to look at the number of tablets prescribed. It's really just junk science, and with a political agenda, basically.
Yeah, I spoke with Angel Smithers earlier. We spoke, and it's looking so grim. I would love to see media be served and media be held accountable. And you know what we may do for the listeners out there, because Dr. Smithers' case is being, once it hit the AP, we're going to use this to our advantage, because this may be how pain patients need to be brought to the forefront. But, if Angel's listening, Angel, we support you. Mark, do you have another question before we let you go? Do you have anything else for Dr. Laird?
No, that's it. I just see this the same as what you just said, Claudia. I see the Smithers case, because it's so widely spread now. It is an opportunity for us to bring the local papers that are printing this up to date on the absurdity of the whole thing, and hopefully that'll just backfire. If not, then maybe one of the agencies themselves are accountable. Maybe AP is accountable for publishing it in the way that they did. But it needs to be countered. That's sure, and I'm doing my best locally and nationally to do so. So thank you, Dr. Laird.
Oh, thank you. You bet.
So, Dan, can the CDC be sued for those guidelines?
Stuff like that is really tough, because when you're talking about a government entity, they basically have immunity. Mm-hmm. And so you're really picking a fight with a tiger. And it's, this litigation can become so expensive so quickly. And so it's really tough to take on the government. What you're doing, Claudia, through advocacy is so much more effective. Like, if you want to change your board of medicine in your state, lobby your governor, because usually the governor is the one who appoints doctors to the board of medicine. And so if you appoint the right people, for example, Texas has a fantastic, I think, board of medicine, and they have a really strong medical society president, I believe, who's been pretty vocal about sticking up for pain patients and pain doctors. And that's kind of the way we need to do it, is I think through advocacy. You can sue private entities, but suing government entities gets really tricky, and it can become really expensive, and it's very easy to lose that kind of a lawsuit.
Yeah. And it goes back to know your state, protect your state. And I think people get, they're intimidated when they hear the governor. But, the governor is the only person above the medical board, because some medical boards, I use the term police, they're not being policed. The governor is the person to do that. And that's why, for the callers, it's so important to be involved. And people would say, well, I'm afraid I'll lose my medication if I protest. You're going to lose your medication. You're probably going to lose it anyway. But at least if you're out there, I tell people it's like after a gym workout, you never leave the gym saying, oh, man, I wish I didn't work out. And it's the same with the protest. After you protest and after you spoke with media, you go to bed and you feel fulfilled. You're like, oh, my God, I'm so glad I did this. And even if a few people showed up, but now doctors are showing up at the rallies because they want to get involved, but they're timid. They're afraid, rightfully so. So, Dan, We have a phrase. Dr. Feldman and I, we use the phrase educate, legislate, advocate. You're a doctor. You're a lawyer. What's some advice that you can give to doctors that are listening? We do have a lot of doctors that listen overnight. What advice do you have for the doctor if they're not in trouble but they want to get involved? What can they do?
Well, I think the first thing that doctors need to do is protect themselves so that they're and there are CMEs that you can go to that will cover this, but your documentation needs to be meticulous, and there's ways to do it where you can do it without having to hire another set of staff to do it. But there's things, for example, I have a pain questionnaire that I have my patients fill out every single visit, and most of them could recite this questionnaire by heart because it's
Sure.
the same questionnaire. They've done it for 5 years in a row,
Yep.
every month for 5 years. But I have documentation every single month that where I ask about, is this medicine helping you? Do you want to taper the medication? Do you want to try buprenorphine? Do you want to are you using physical modalities as the first line of defense against your pain? Are you doing home physical therapy? All of this stuff that can be documented to protect the doctor. And then, there's all kinds of tricks of the trade that you learn that I think doctors can do to protect themselves. But then, of course, it's important to get active in the state medical society, to get active if you have a county medical society, and to develop a relationship with legislators. When Nevada's anti-opioid law came out, I was so angry, but I called my assemblyman and we met at Starbucks and I went through the whole thing, and now he gets it. He follows me on Twitter, and hopefully he's not going to vote for another one of these idiotic bills again.
Right.
A lot of them, if they know that there's a consequence for not learning an issue, then they're more careful, and that's what we have to do. It's educate, just what you're doing. And these rallies, I think, are so phenomenal because it gets the attention of media. I'm just hoping we can get one down in Las Vegas. They have one up in Reno, but we still aren't very organized down here in Las Vegas. But I can't applaud you enough for what you've done, Claudia. It's been amazing, and I think these people who want to pick on pain patients need to understand that we're just getting started.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
When you just said something, it resonated. When I first met, I took my local representative on a social media journey. That poor man has received, he's like, I think I've received 10,000 emails from pain patients around the country. And, but that's how HR 5434 got sponsored. And when I was on the House floor with him, I looked at him and I said, do you get it? And he said, I get it. And I said, no, Greg, do you get it? He said, I get it. Because he could just see the horror, the shame, the sadness that was brought to innocent people who were able to spend time with their children and get up and brush their teeth and do their hair and go to work. And in one fell swoop, everything changed. In Nevada, is there a law? Is a doctor free to prescribe 90 MMEs or greater, or do you have another number because every state has a different number? What's the climate in Nevada outside of incredibly hot?
Right. It is cooling down finally, though. Our anti-opioid bill is very strange in that it created a whole bunch of ridiculous barriers, but when you got through them, and the interesting thing was that I was actually already doing, I would say, 90% of what the bill required. However, I'm a fanatic about documentation, and most doctors don't go that far. But once you got through all the barriers, we didn't have a MME ceiling. In other words, there was for, I think, acute pain for 7 days or something, but one for chronic pain patients, there wasn't a ceiling, but the harm, I don't think so much is in the details of the specifics of the legislation. The harm is in the environment that it creates, because it basically creates, one of the cases that I'm looking at right now for a medical malpractice case is a man who went in for gallbladder surgery, and they discharged him the same day, and the surgeon told him at his discharge that I will not be writing any pain medication for you because it's illegal. And they discharged this guy after gallbladder surgery with no pain medicine. He got down the road a mile and had to turn around and come back to the hospital. And as it turned out, he had a huge bowel perforation and had peritonitis, and he suffered for hours with no pain medication. It's the hysteria that was created by the law and the misunderstanding and the ignorance of doctors who just heard, oh my God, I'm going to jail if I prescribe opiates, and I'm not going to do it anymore. I'm just not going to put my career and my family at risk. I'm just going to, my solution is going to be, I'm not going to prescribe any opioids. Well, of course, that has a series of consequences too, like you get sued for medical malpractice because you treated your patient like crap. But they don't think about that in the heat of the moment.
Right. So in that specific case, who's negligent? Is it the doctor? Is it the hospital? Is it both? Can they be sued civilly? You know what?
Yes. The answer is yes, and it's a combination. I think there's negligence on both the part of we will allege negligence on the part of both the hospital and the surgeon. What have we come to? I mean, this is something you wouldn't see in a third world country. Sure. Morphine is it's a WHO essential medication. You don't cut into someone's belly and take out their gallbladder and then not give them any pain medicine. Where did this come from? I mean, it's just gone way too far. And then you hear the patients talk about it, and it's horrific. I mean, it is truly horrific what's happening. And yes, there's liability. There's going to,
It's a slice of horror. One of my lawmakers, he actually has an addiction center, but he found me because he said my father suffered when he was in hospice. And he said the only way I could fight back is I had to get a law changed. So they would be held responsible if this happened again. And he said, you know what, Claudia, until it happens to them, they're clueless. And I always said, I think, we need 10 senators to acknowledge the suffering, and that will happen. You're going to turn on the news one day, and you're going to see a senator with his face red, and he's going to be shaking his fist at the sky saying, how did this happen? Well, we know how it happened, and the senators absolutely know what's happening, and many will concede to overcorrected guidelines. But it seems like our only tactical way of getting around this is with, is with lawsuits. And you need to be litigious right now. That's how we're going to fight back. We have a few more minutes. Dan, my apologies. That's my menopause. What words of solace can you bring to the listeners? This show will run live tomorrow, and I know, like I said, you really are a hero on Twitter. Your tweets, Dan, they're always filled with compassion, and I sense your anger and your frustration when you're tweeting. I was like, man, how does this guy have all this time? If he's not in a courtroom, he's in with one of his patients. Yeah. So I just commend you. I'm really, I'm awestruck by, like, really, for real. And I don't say that a whole lot. I talked with a lot of doctors, and I'm like, I could take you or leave you. But even last night when we spoke, I was like, God, this guy, he's so kind. And just, I always go back to that word compassion, because compassion is free. What do you want to say to the listeners who are struggling and they're thinking about, God only knows, what can you say?
Well, thank you for your kind words, Claudia. I think that the first thing to keep in mind is that we've made tremendous progress. in the last 2 years, we've gone from it's open season on chronic pain patients to I think a lot of the most vocal, most hateful people attacking, launching these ad hominem attacks on pain patients have stopped. They've realized that there's enough pushback. So we're making tremendous progress, thanks mostly to pain patient activists who are on Twitter and other social media, and who are doing things like you're doing, organizing rallies, working with legislators, working with state boards of medicine, and so forth. It's the pain patients who I would give 99% of the credit. A lawsuit can make a difference, but litigation moves so painfully slow, and it's one case at a time, and so it takes a lot of time and effort to make a difference through litigation. But I think we need to attack on all fronts. But the most powerful, potent weapon we have is the pain patients speaking up for themselves. And historically, it's always been this way. When organized medicine or government turned its back or spit in the face of a particular patient group, it was the patients who ultimately turned things around, and we're seeing this again. Yeah. I think as far as chronic pain goes, chronic pain is the most fascinating, interesting area of medicine, and you're seeing the results of it, although we're seeing it in kind of a negative way at the moment. Look at the passion that it stirs up. It's controversial. It's fascinating. It involves not just science and medicine, but it also involves politics and social policy and legal policy. There's a historian, I believe he's at Yale. I can't remember his name at the moment, but he's basically a historian of pain, and he's written a book that's just fascinating. It talks about the history of pain, and what it always boils down to is it's a judgment call about people wanting to make a judgment about whose pain is important. And that's a very, very dangerous area to get into, because everybody's pain is important. And none of us is in a position to say, your pain's important, but yours isn't. Because that's basically bigotry, and that's where we don't want to go. We want to value each human being with the idea that every person is valuable because of their inherent dignity as a human being. And everybody deserves compassion. And that's where we were 20 years ago, but we've taken a step back now, and we need to take maneuvers to get back to where we were.
Can a person die from pain?
Well, pain is, one of the confusing parts about pain is that, the people will say, oh, pain is in your head. Well, yeah, no, it is in your head. That's where we experience pain. All pain is in my head. If I hit my hand with a hammer as hard as I can, I'm going to feel pain, and the pain is going to be felt in my head. The nerves are going to transmit the signal to my head, and I'm going to have an emotional response to that. So I've sort of lost my train of thought. Tell me the question again.
When their blood pressure is elevated and they're sweating, I've had several bowel resections. That's pain. I was fortunate when I was treated after bowel resections. I remember thinking, this is it, it's lights out. But I remember it would keep me so sedated because they could tell the amount of pain that my body was in. And I think, as a person with pain, when you're in that type of pain,
absolutely,
you think,
Claudia.
This is it.
Your question, I sort of got lost in my own forest there, but yes, you can die from pain. I mean, pain isn't going to directly cause death, but what it can do is cause catecholamine release and hypertension, tachycardia, that kind of thing, where that can lead to some terminal event. For example, in the case that I just mentioned against the VA that we're looking at, the patient had metastatic cancer, had his pain medicine reduced when he moved to Las Vegas, and then finally on the day he died, he had metastatic cancer in every organ, but it was in terrible, terrible pain, and the family had the foresight to get an autopsy, and the autopsy showed that he didn't die of cancer, although you might think that he had because the cancer was everywhere. He died of a heart attack. The autopsy showed he had a myocardial infarction. And I don't have any doubt, nor did the forensic pathologist who did the autopsy have any doubt that that death was due to untreated pain.
Oh, how sad. Just,
Yeah.
I saw a doctor on LinkedIn, and I couldn't understand what he was saying, but he said, well, look how bad things went after we added pain as a fifth vital sign. I'm not a doctor, but I didn't understand that. But then we took away pain as a fifth vital sign. What are your thoughts on that? Should we bring back pain as a vital sign? It seems important, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, this is one of the things that the people pushing this anti-opioid narrative and overprescribing narrative attributed the increase in opioid prescriptions to, was the idea that pain is the fifth vital sign. Pain is the fifth vital sign, and it should always be the fifth vital sign, is the way I feel about it. That doesn't mean that you indiscriminately prescribe opiates, but pain is harmful. And I know that it's become fashionable to say that pain builds character and it's good for you and so forth. That isn't what the medical literature shows. The medical literature shows that pain is bad physiologically, and it causes harm to the human body. And so there is a way to relieve pain without over-sedating or basically killing the patient. It's done every day to millions of patients in this country. Part of what's driving this whole anti-opioid movement, of course, is the fact that these lawsuits that are against the pharmaceutical companies that are being driven by basically politicians and lawyers. And so they are hell-bent on making opioids the devil. But that's going to come to an end eventually. Eventually, they're going to shake down all the pharmaceutical companies that they can, and then they'll just drop it and move on to the next mass tort litigation topic, and we'll be left to deal with the ruins of this movement. Mm-hmm. So things are getting better by hook or by crook, and I think that the future does look good for pain patients. Just need to hang on and keep fighting.
Right. Well, Dan, I can't thank you enough for joining us tonight. So people can follow Dan on Twitter. It's Dan M. Laird, Laird, and we have your bio up. And, if you're in Las Vegas, if you're a veteran and you want to reach out to Dan the attorney, let's try it. Folks, once again, we protest again on October 16, and, it takes nothing to organize. We will help you promote. Just get out there and be seen, be heard. You keep fighting. And lastly, most importantly, remember this: I get my strength from your strength. Have a great night, everybody.
Thanks for joining us for the DPP Rally Talk Show. Subscribe to our channel at DPP Rally Talk Show with Claudia on YouTube. Copyright 2019. All rights reserved.